If you were to view the track layout of the Twin Cities on a map, you would be greeted with a maze of seemingly never ending rails operated by a variety of railways. Among them is four of North America's giant Class 1s, two regional short line roads, and at least until January of next year, North Star commuter rail service. While up in Minnesota to film the Milwaukee Road 261 steam locomotive, we managed to find time to hunt for short line operations. We will begin our Sunday morning in St. Paul, near the locomotive roundhouse of the Minnesota Commercial Railroad. Today we will be following Minnesota Commercial's Job 19, or more commonly referred to as the Hugo Job. Around 9:30 a.m., a duo of the short line's classic Dash 7 locomotives makes their way out of the shop. From here they will tie on to their outbound train in the yard and begin their journey to Hugo. With its train picked up, the Dash 7s cross over the BNSF St. Paul subdivision. Throughout its 86 miles of track, Minnesota Commercial has numerous interchanges, junctions, and diamonds shared with other railroads. The MNNR was formed in the 1980s to take over operations formerly conducted by the Minnesota Transfer Railroad. The transfer was owned and formed by many of the Class 1s that ran through the Twin Cities. Since Minnesota Commercial took over the lease, the terminal road has skyrocketed in overall business and has become a crucial artery in the rail network for the region. It currently interchanges with BNSF, Canadian National, CPKC, Union Pacific, as well as the Twin Cities and Western. As the Hugo Job comes through Roseville, it has diverted off the Commercial's main to the east. Job 19 currently operates 3 days a week, on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. It works multiple industries along the route, which we will soon be seeing. On the point of today's Hugo Job is MNNR number 44. This B23-7 was originally built in 1979 for the Santa Fe. It would faithfully serve under the ATSF flag until the merger with Burlington Northern. BNSF would continue to utilize the Dash 7 for several years until selling it to National Railway Equipment. NRE leased the motor to shortline operations, such as the Great Sand Hills Railway in Saskatchewan. In 2013, the Minnesota Commercial purchased the old workhorse and replaced the blue and yellow Santa Fe paint with the bright red scheme that is still seen today. In White Bear Lake, we find the Hugo Job working its first industry of the day, UFP Industries. This company currently employs over 15,000 people and is affiliated with well over 200 operations not just in North America, but also Europe, Asia, and Australia. From brief research, they seem to specialize in manufacturing and distribution of various wood products for commercial and residential use, as well as packaging solutions. The Dash 7 locomotive series' intent was to directly compete with the EMD's overwhelmingly successful Jeep series. Production started in 1976, and it would continue until 1985. Around 2,800 Dash 7s were constructed. This was before the market share leaned in General Electric's favor, so EMD would still outsell and produce their locomotives by the thousands. Even though the crew has completed its work at UFP, there is still one more task on the to-do list before continuing to Hugo. The GE duo will run light power down a spur line to pick up a few cars that are in storage. The GEs will return to the rest of the train and resume the trek to the north. Leapfrogging ahead of Job 19, we spot what I believe is CN Local L506 at what the railroad calls Bald Eagle. This diamond is shared between Minnesota Commercial and CPKC. Canadian National currently has trackage rights over the Withrow subdivision. With the L506 clear, Minnesota Commercial now has authority to cross over the main line. Our cameras are set up where a depot once stood that guarded this diamond. The weather had been overcast for a majority of the day, and the rain finally arrived in force by the time the train had made it to Hugo. This is the end of the line for the Minnesota commercial. If the train decided to keep going north, it would run straight onto a bike trail formed on the former right-of-way. After switching out the Schweiders Company center beam cars, it's time for the locomotives to run around the train and begin the return trip to St. Paul. Reminding residents of a bygone era of railroading, the former Northern Pacific White Bear Lake Depot sits in beautiful condition, along with a caboose. While now the Minnesota commercial only passes 3 days a week, the town was once a major railroad town with around 25% of the population working for the railways in the 1930s. Now number 49 is in the lead. This is a B30-7, which sports 3,000 horsepower versus the B23's 2,300. 49 was built in 1981 for the Chesapeake in Ohio. It later served Eastern Giant CSX before winding up on the commercial's roster. The day for the Hugo Job crew is almost complete. Here it is approaching the Diamond with BNSF to await clearance. Luckily for them, it doesn't take long for dispatch to give signal indication to cross over. Once across the Diamond, the freight cars will be dropped in the Minnesota Commercial's yard for the switching crew to sort through the following day, and the power will head back to the roundhouse to tie down. I really hope that you've enjoyed this video on the Minnesota Commercial's Classic Dash 7s on the Hugo Job. Minnesota was really good to us on our weekend trip, and we'd definitely like to be back in the future to document everything else that we missed. But until the next time, my friends, I will be seeing you somewhere out there along the rails, and as always, thanks for watching.